Hey, and what's up, guys? And welcome to the first of a series of game scripts that I'm going to be doing for the Super Bowl and leading into the Super Bowl. Going to be doing a few of these shows. In this particular episode, be focusing on the first look at some of the matchups, the key matchups that each team has, and the advantages that each team has in the Super Bowl. And I'll get into it right after this. Hey, what's up, guys? Simon Edwards at Pumacom here with Heat Seeker Sports, and you're watching Game Script. On today's episode is going to be the first of a series of Super Bowl game scripts that I'm going to be producing. I'm going to have some guests on the other ones, but this is just me solo, just kind of going over some of the matchups that I'm seeing right off the bat and trying to do a little analysis on initial thoughts on how those matchups are shaping up and the advantages that each team is going to have. And we'll build some DraftKings Showdown lineups based on that. Before I get into that, make sure to hit the like button. Looking for about 20 likes on this one to put out a shorter video a little bit later on as we get closer to the Super Bowl. Make sure to hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. I'm at 470, aiming to get 500 before the end of the season. We got a week left, and I'll be putting out plenty of Super Bowl content. So make sure to subscribe. Going to be doing several shows, several game script type shows leading into the Super Bowl. And each one of those shows will have a little bit more knowledge as we get some more information heading into the Super Bowl. So today's episode, I'm going to be focused on what I said earlier on the matchups that I see. Make sure to also subscribe to Underdog. I'm running a promotion with Underdog right now. If you use the promo code SEEK, SEEK, they're going to match you up to $100 on your first deposit. So you're going to want to do that and get that free money. They're going to be having a lot of cool contests running for the Super Bowl as well. And I'll do a show focused on that as well at some point next week. So make sure to check that out. And let's get into it. So basically, the past few weeks, what I've been talking about throughout these playoffs, one of the key matchups has been the running games versus the Chiefs. And that is where the Chiefs' biggest weakness is in defending the run. And we've seen it, pretty consistently. We didn't see Baltimore take advantage of that last week, which on the surface didn't make a whole lot of sense. But if you look at how Buffalo approached their game against Kansas City, and they went two-run heavy, they got a lot of criticism for going two-run heavy. So then when they went two-run heavy, they kept Patrick Mahomes in the game despite the ability with Josh Allen to be more pass heavy in that game. They decided to take a run heavy approach. They got a lot of criticism for it. When Baltimore had their game last week, they also have a quarterback capable of, putting up some points through the air. They went with a passing strategy against Kansas City and ended up biting them in the ass. So it doesn't really matter which approach that you take against the Chiefs. You have a tendency, these teams have a tendency to psych themselves out. And that is a huge advantage that the Chiefs have over San Francisco in this particular game, because teams fear Kansas City based on what they've done in the past in the playoffs and the Super Bowl. They have a success record in the playoffs and the Super Bowl. They've won a couple Super Bowls recently. They've been to a bunch of Super Bowls recently. So the matchup on the San Francisco side is largely going to be psychological, whereas Kansas City is going to have a psychological edge. They're just going to be trying to beat, the game plan of San Francisco. So I think with the Kansas City side, that is a big edge to have, especially when you're playing against a team led by Kyle Shanahan, who has choked a few times in these big games. We've seen it, several times from him. Maybe this is the time where he breaks the curse. Andy Reid, before he got Patrick Mahomes was known for the same thing. He was known for, not managing the clock right in certain situations. He lost the Super Bowl because of it. And, he used to lose a bunch of playoff games because of it as well. So no matter how good of a coach Andy Reid was, he didn't get his first Super Bowl until he had Patrick Mahomes. So Kyle Shanahan in a very similar situation. He's got kind of like a reputation of not performing in the big games, and he has an opportunity in this game to kind of wipe that out. So opportunity for Shanahan. He's got a good quarterback to pull that off with. If we look strictly at the quarterback matchups, Brock Purdy is facing an opposition that has 30% pressure rate, and Brock Purdy has a very good completion percentage under pressure. He's making completions at 56% rate, so he's very good under pressure. Patrick Mahomes, on the other hand, is facing off against San Francisco, which pressures at 31% of the time. That's a high rate. And Patrick Mahomes has a 45% completion percentage under pressure. So San Francisco, from a pressure standpoint, has an advantage here. And that's going to lead some other advantages that San Francisco has in this game, which I'll get into in a minute. Against pressure, Patrick Mahomes still throws touchdowns. He has 6 touchdowns under pressure. He also has 6 interceptions. Brock Purdy under pressure has 7 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. So there's about equal advantage there for both of them as far as touchdowns, but Patrick Mahomes has thrown a few more interceptions under pressure. From a blitz percentage, Patrick Mahomes' blitz completion percentage is 67%. But the San Francisco 49ers don't blitz a lot. They're only blitzing at 21% of the time. Versus Brock Purdy, he has a blitz completion percentage of 70%, and the opposition blitzes at 33% of the time. So Brock Purdy should not be fazed by the Kansas City blitzing on paper, at least. It's all going to be psychological when it comes to Brock Purdy in this game. But he has performed well under pressure, and he has performed well when being blitzed this season. He's actually one of the best quarterbacks, like in a lot of stats this season, and those are included. He's among the top as far as those stats. For a man completion percentage, it looks like Brock Purdy has a 67% completion percentage when facing man coverage. And his passer rating is 129.5. And the Chiefs are running man coverage at 52% of the time, which is a high rate. So another thing that should not hurt Brock Purdy, that he should perform well in. So he's doing very well against man coverage. On the other side, Patrick Mahomes has a 59, close to 60% completion percentage against man coverage. His rating versus man coverage is 89, and the San Francisco 49ers are only running man coverage at 32% of the time. It might be something where they run a little bit man coverage, like who knows what their game plan will be, but something to keep in mind. Patrick Mahomes not as good as Brock Purdy when facing man coverage, and his passer rating is 89 versus Brock Purdy's passer rating at 129.5. So those are some matchup ideas there. With the actual points allowed, DraftKings points allowed, San Francisco is allowing 17.9 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position, whereas Kansas City is allowing 17 DraftKings points a game to the quarterback position. So it's about equal there. I think that as far as the specific matchups for the receivers on the Kansas City side, San Francisco is allowing 12.6 DraftKings points a game to the slot position. And as we know, one of the key receivers for Patrick Mahomes is Rashee Rice, and he runs 49% of his routes from the slot. So it's a very poor matchup for Rashee Rice. San Francisco has been shutting people down in the middle of the field, and I'm not sure exactly how they're going to use Rice, but like the other receivers that the Chiefs have that would be facing the wideouts, which wideout cornerbacks, which are much more vulnerable on the San Francisco side, are going to be Justin Watson and MVS. So like those are the guys that have the matchup advantages on the Chiefs from the wideout perspective. And neither of those guys are one of the guys that shine this year. It's been all Rashee Rice, and he has the worst matchup out of that group. Who does have a good matchup is Travis Kelce, because San Francisco has been allowing 14 DraftKings points a game to the tight end position. And obviously, Patrick Mahomes has been leaning on Travis Kelce, especially through these playoffs. I've talked about it the last few weeks when doing game script, is that Travis Kelce was going to get that playoff muscle reflex coming back to him, and he'd be doing well in the playoffs. So been kind of heavy on him in the game scripts that we've done so far, and he's paid off so far, and he's had a couple good games recently. And I think that this is going to be a Kelce game, if anything. And we look at Kelce, what he's done these last few weeks, 32 points against Baltimore, 24.5 versus Buffalo, and 14 versus Miami. So I've liked him for a few weeks now. Travis Kelce has been coming through, and I just think we keep that going against San Francisco, because San Francisco is vulnerable to the tight end position. It's probably, along with wideouts specifically, their weak spot in their defense. So Travis Kelce will be in play. Christian McCaffrey, if we're looking at the running back allowances on each team, San Francisco is a much better run defense. They're only allowing 20 DraftKings points a game to running backs, versus Kansas City, which is allowing 22 DraftKings points a game to running backs. That sets up Christian McCaffrey very nicely to have a good game, and I would not be surprised if he ends up being the highest scoring raw points guy on the slate. So if we're looking even further with the Kansas City side, I've talked the last few weeks. Warren Sharp put out a stat a few weeks ago about how San Francisco was vulnerable to outside zone running. So that is probably the strategy that they're going to want to take with Pacheco this week. But San Francisco is not impervious to running backs. It just depends on what kind of runs that they're doing. Pacheco ended up with 18 DraftKings points last week, 18 DraftKings points against Buffalo. And I would expect them to try to keep him rolling in this game against San Francisco, because I think that Kansas City is going to need to take a run-heavy approach Kansas City is going to need to take a run-heavy approach in this one. So it's going to be something that we're going to want to do some more digging into. I want to see how much outside zone running that Pacheco's been doing this season. Brock Purdy has a good matchup, as I mentioned. He's been pretty consistent this year. He's had a few down weeks. We see a 15 DraftKings point week in week 20 against Green Bay, and we see a 6 DraftKings points a week. That week they got destroyed against Baltimore, but he's got a lot more of these 18 points against Washington, 25 against Arizona, 25 against Seattle, 32 against Philly. So he's been pretty consistent, and there's a pretty, let's see what the price difference between him and Mahomes. Mahomes is only $600 more. So if we see a lot of that ownership leaning towards Patrick Mahomes because of Purdy's price being up there with Mahomes' price, then that would be an interesting situation to maybe get some exposure to Brock Purdy, and maybe even some heavier exposure. You can see with Patrick Mahomes, he had 15 DraftKings points against Baltimore, 18.5 against Buffalo, 18.5 against Miami. Before that, he's had like 13 DraftKings points, 17. He's very rarely hit 20 DraftKings points this season. It's been a struggle for him with this offense, like the weapons that he has. He's been able to get things together the last few weeks and get Rashee Rice more involved and breaking out a little bit, and then Kelce as well. But when you take Rashee Rice out of the game, maybe because of the coverage in the San Francisco secondary is too good for Rashee Rice, a rookie, then that's going to set up Mahomes to lean more heavily on Kelce. So if he's only got one weapon, he doesn't have that outlet that he used to have with Tyreek Hill. He's got to rely on MVS, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who, he's made some big plays recently, but look at his fantasy output. He's only had 5.8 DraftKings points against Baltimore, 8.2 against Buffalo, 1.8 against Miami. So he's been doing well these last couple weeks. I think that his ownership might be high due to how he's done and the big moments that he's had recently. So he's one that we want to keep an eye on for his ownership. And then the other guy is Justin Watson. He's the other wideout that could be able to take advantage of the San Francisco defense. But as you can see with Watson, the last big week he had was in week 16 versus Vegas. And he had a week against Philly, which also had a weak defense against wideouts. So Justin Watson could be interesting this week at 2,400 especially, and facing that San Francisco wideout defense, which has been vulnerable this season. So he's a guy that we want to keep in mind this week. Deebo Samuel is another guy that I want to keep in mind. He's got about a 30% of his routes run from the slot, and that's where I mentioned that Kansas City. Another stat that we've been focused on these last few weeks is that Kansas City, 52% of the receptions against Kansas City have come from slot receivers or in the slot. And that sets up Deebo Samuel to have a decent game in this one. I think Samuel is going to have a better matchup than Aiyuk. You can see last week, Samuel had 17.6 DraftKings points against Detroit. Prior to that, he had 4.4 against Green Bay. He got hurt in that game. He had 5.2 versus the Rams, but they weren't really playing their starters the whole game that week. 18.2 versus Washington. If people are just looking at the box scores here and they see these weak performances, not understanding the context, then that could set us up for some decent ownership on Deebo this week, and he'd be a captain option that I'd be interested in. Deebo Samuel, Aiyuk, I mentioned, does not have a great matchup. I'm betting that Snead will probably be more on Aiyuk than on Samuel maybe this week, or maybe just splitting time between them. But I think that Ayuk's wideout matchup is much worse than Deebo's matchup is, because the wideouts are only getting 7.2 DraftKings points a game from the Kansas City defense. They're getting 20 DraftKings points a game to the slot. So that is a significant difference. And with Aiyuk primarily running from wideout position, he's only running 20% of his routes from the slot. That's going to set up Aiyuk to be a disappointment this week or during the Super Bowl. So Aiyuk, depending on what his ownership is going to be a guy that we can consider not having so much exposure to. He had 15.8 DraftKings points against Detroit. He had 6 against Green Bay and 6 again versus the Rams. So a lot of these guys, like the matchups are kind of like leading into a particular direction. It's going to be a matter of finding the best combination of players to get in there. And if we want to get different at certain spots, Pacheco is a guy that I like this week. As I mentioned, he had 18 DraftKings points against Baltimore, 18 versus Buffalo, 16 versus Miami, 32 versus Cincy. So he's going to be a guy that we can keep in our player pool. Rashee Rice, I do not like Rashee Rice in the Super Bowl. And, he hasn't done that great in the playoffs in general. He's come through at some key moments. So he's been more of a better NFL player than a fantasy player. And I don't expect him to have a big week against San Francisco with their strength against the slot receivers. George Kittle, I think that he is in play as well. I think Kittle and Deebo, I think one of those guys is going to have a big game against the Chiefs. It's going to depend on how much running they want to do, because if they got Kittle, doing a bunch of run blocking and stuff like that, then maybe Kittle does not have as big a game. If you want a big game from Kittle, you might want to envision them playing a tighter game, or like a game where they're playing from behind. So we see Kittle, he had a big week against Green Bay. They won that game 24-21. Kittle had a big game against Baltimore. They lost that game 33-19. Kittle had a big game against Seattle. They won that game by 12 points, so they had a pretty significant win there. They beat Tampa Bay by 13 points, and they had Kittle at 23 DraftKings points. They blew out Jacksonville 34-3. Kittle had 24 DraftKings points in that one. They had lost to Cincinnati 17-31. Kittle had 27 DraftKings points in that one. Another thing with Kittle too is Deebo's playing time, because when Deebo is out, that's where Kittle tends to do better. Deebo missed some time this year. Let's see where he missed. Deebo missed. Let's see. He missed weeks 7 through 9, basically. So let's look at Kittle in weeks 7 through 9. So in week 7, that's where Kittle had 13 DraftKings points. In week 8, he had 26.9 DraftKings points. Week 9 looks like it was just a bye. So week 6, he only had 1.1 versus Cleveland. So, yeah, so Kittle, I think the game script that we mainly want with Kittle is probably going to be a game script where their game is staying tight, or it's going to be San Francisco playing from behind. So, I mean, that's at least where I would look for Kittle exposure. For the kickers, Moody, I talked about him last week being a rookie kicker who has missed a few field goals already, and they probably wouldn't rely on him so much. He had 3 attempts last week. He missed 1. He ended up with 11 DraftKings points. So he ended up with a good game, but he still missed that field goal. And in the Super Bowl, I don't know how willing they're going to be to turn to Jake Moody with the longer field goal attempts. I would guess that, they're probably going to shy away from him unless it's under 40 yards or 45 yards. They might tend to go for it a little bit more than normal in this game. We're talking about that psychological edge that Kansas City has. Putting Jake Moody, a guy who's been inconsistent in key moments to kick field goals, might be something that they shy away from. On the other hand, Harrison Butker is a money kicker. He's had many weeks this season over 10 DraftKings points, and Butker, I would imagine, if they stall out in the red zone or close to it, like, they will be relying on Butker a lot in the Super Bowl. I do like Butker in the Super Bowl. 49ers D, could have a decent game because, like I said, if they are able to shut down Rashee Rice, and that's going to put more attention, they'll be able to put more attention on Kelce. And Patrick Mahomes doesn't have like the Tyreek Hills of the world to be his release valve anymore. He's got to rely on Justin Watson and Marquise Valdes-Scantling, guys like Kadarius Toney, who's been just a disaster. Guys like that, like Patrick Mahomes might have a tendency to throw some interceptions in this game if he's forced to throw to those other guys. With Juwan Jennings, same issue with the slot receivers against Kansas City. 52% of the receptions have been slot receivers. So Jennings is in play, and he's some salary relief at $4K, but he is expensive for $4K considering he doesn't really do much. We saw him get 2 targets last week. He got 6 against Green Bay. He does get he does have a nickname of Third and Juwan, and that's for a reason. He's clutch in those situations where they need to throw in a third down situation, and he comes through and makes these ridiculous catches. I'm surprised they don't use him more, to be honest, but that's just the way that they use him. And he comes through when he's needed, and he's had some big games, so he's a guy that we can leave in our player pool. The Chiefs defense is another one that we can leave in our player pool. We've seen Brock Purdy have those meltdowns. Chiefs got a good defense, and the Chiefs defense could definitely put up double-digit points against San Francisco in this one, considering the psychological edge that they have over Mr. Irrelevant starting in the Super Bowl. it's going to be, like definitely a edge leaning towards the Chiefs in this one. With Valdez-Scantling, I mentioned him. He's come through a couple times. Hasn't really done much from a fantasy perspective. Elijah Mitchell, probably shy away from Elijah Mitchell, although Christian McCaffrey landed on his head on the final play, and that's why they brought in Elijah Mitchell to run in a touchdown. It looked like McCaffrey was in pain on the sideline. I haven't heard any injury updates or anything, so maybe he's fine. But he did not look good on that sideline when they had the guy that was massaging his thigh a couple weeks ago was massaging his neck in that one, and he did not look like he was feeling too good in that. So let's look at. Let's see, Justin Watson. He's another guy that I would leave in the player pool just because of the susceptibility to wideouts that San Francisco has. Sky Moore, not really sure what they're doing, what his situation is with IR, but I would not imagine he's going to be heavily used in this game. He has not done well this season, and coming off of injured reserve with a knee injury is not the best recipe for success. Hardman fumbled into the end zone a couple weeks ago, but we not really sure how he would be used. He didn't get any opportunities last week. And he is 1,600, so he's expensive on top of it. Tony has been criticizing the Chiefs recently on his social media, talking about how he wasn't hurt when they had him on injured reserve or like on the injury reports. So Tony is probably a guy that they don't want to use, but they might use him regardless. He had 4 targets last game against New England. He had 4 targets for Buffalo. That Buffalo game is where Patrick Mahomes freaked out because Kadarius Toney was not lined up properly, and Patrick Mahomes blamed it on the refs, even though it was Toney's fault. So that takes you back to some of the issues that they've had with Kadarius Toney just being a head case recently. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is probably not the best option in this matchup with San Francisco being so good against the run. As I mentioned, they are weak against outside zone running backs. So we're going to want to see where that comes into play with who's running most of their runs against outside zone. But I think that Pacheco is going to be running the bulk of the runs regardless. Juszczyk would be a perfect guy to come in and sneak in and score a touchdown in this game. He's got $800 salary. We've seen it with Juszczyk in the past, where in these big games, he made a huge catch last week. So, he's a dependable guy. And, like the catch that he made last week kept them alive when Brock Purdy was scrambling. So, they love Juszczyk on San Francisco, and don't be surprised if they end up using him. Jordan Mason, not really interested in going that low. I think as far as dumpster diving, Juszczyk might be the lowest. Ray McLeod, another guy that could potentially get a target or two, but I'm not really interested there in the Super Bowl. And I don't really see too much else that I would be interested in there. I want to take a look real quick at let's go to Pro Football Reference, because these teams played each other in the Super Bowl a couple years ago. So we can take a look at that box score. Going to look at George Kittle's record here, and I'll switch over my screen to Pro Football Reference. Let's check out his career stats. We're going to go into Kansas City Chiefs here. All right, so they've played them 3 times recently, including the Super Bowl in 2019. Steve Spagnuolo has been the defensive coordinator in these years. He might not have been there in 2018. I can't remember, but he's been there in 2022 and 2020. So let's look at these box scores and see how they played the 49ers. Looking at the first one is the Super Bowl from 2019. If we look at the box score in that one, Jimmy G he was the quarterback. Raheem Mostert ran 12 times for 58. They ran they ran 20 times. They had about a little over 130 yards rushing. They scored a touchdown. As far as the receivers, Kittle had 7 targets in that game, four receptions. Kendrick Bourne had 4. Emmanuel Sanders had 5 receptions or 5 targets in that game. Deebo Samuel ended up running the ball 3 times for 51 yards. He had 9 targets, 5 receptions, 39 yards. So the Chiefs were largely able to keep them in check. The touchdown went to Kyle Juszczyk, as I was talking about earlier. On the other side, Mahomes did great. We're talking about a different defensive coordinator, obviously. Mahomes had 286 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Tyreek Hill was the biggest beneficiary of that. 16 targets, 9 receptions, 105 yards. Kelce had 6 targets, 6 receptions, 43 yards, and a touchdown. Looks like that was the only touchdown that they threw. As far as scoring goes, largely field goals in this one, and then a couple touchdowns by Damian Williams. And then he had Kelce chip one in, Mostert, and Juszczyk. Actually, it was mostly touchdowns now that I'm taking a closer look at it. Robbie Gould had 2 field goals. Butker had 1 field goal. And the final score was 31-20 Kansas City. So it wasn't really a close game in that one, but you can kind of see what the breakdown was of what their strategy was, with Kansas City focused on passing to Tyreek Hill and working Travis Kelce in there too. They also worked the running back into the passing game in that one. So interesting stuff there. As I said, they got a completely different teams now, but it's always good to look back and see how they approached it, especially with the San Francisco side, because they got the same offensive play caller in Shanahan, and they got the same defensive coordinator in Spags. So yeah, looking at what the approach was by Shanahan, they preferred to run the ball in that game. Different quarterback, obviously, and different weapons. They got Christian McCaffrey, though, to go along with Deebo and Kittle this year. So let's look at what they did in 2022. We'll see what the box score looked like there. Now, this would be much closer to what these teams are now. So let's take a look and see what they did. Yeah, they had McCaffrey at that point. So last year, this is going to be a box score that we want to pay attention to. Patrick Mahomes passed for 423 yards in that game. So they basically destroyed him in the passing game. The final score was Kansas City 44, San Francisco 23. So they crushed them all around. Mahomes had 423 yards passing with 3 touchdowns. The beneficiaries of that were Mecole Hardman, who had 3 touchdowns in that game. He had 2 rushing touchdowns and 1 receiving touchdown. I'm not saying that Mecole Hardman's going to be that guy this week, but don't discount that, because whoever's either Mecole Hardman or whoever's in that role that Hardman had, they had a matchup that they liked. So that's interesting. With the receiving, we had Smith-Schuster had 8 targets, 7 receptions, 124 yards, and a touchdown. Valdez-Scantling also had 111 yards in that game. Kelce had 98 yards in that game. So they were able to effectively pick them apart, wide out and in the slot with Smith-Schuster. I believe Smith-Schuster was more of a slot receiver. If we look at the San Francisco side, Garoppolo even had 300 passing yards with 2 touchdowns. Kittle had 9 targets, 6 receptions, 98 yards, and a touchdown. Aiyuk had 11 targets, 7 receptions, 82 yards. Looks like Deebo had 7 targets, 5 receptions, and 42 yards. So the standouts, Ray McCloud even had 4 targets, 4 receptions, 65 yards, and a touchdown. Just to give you an idea, they gave 4 targets as well to Kyle Juszczyk in that game. So keep that in mind. 4 targets to Kyle Juszczyk the last time that they played. And then in the Super Bowl a couple years ago, he ended up scoring a touchdown. So that's interesting that they give him that much usage against Kansas City in the couple times that they played him. So I won't go back to we'll take a look at the 2018 game too, just to get an idea. But you can see there's like this last game was a pass-heavy approach. They both had good defenses last year. And San Francisco's, like Kansas City was still dealing with the issue with missing Tyreek and not having many receivers. San Francisco had, a Jimmy Garoppolo as a quarterback, but they had all the weapons that they have now. They just had a different quarterback, basically. So let's take a look at that 2018 game. Oops. I want to see what happened in the 2018 game. Not as significant, obviously. They're very far removed from this. I just kind of want to get a look at Juszczyk. Juszczyk in that one had 4 targets, 2 receptions, 38 yards, and a touchdown. So Juszczyk has scored in 2 of 3 games against Kansas City, which is notable, especially with him being at, where did we say he was? Juszczyk's at 800. And he's had touchdowns in 2 out of 3 games against Kansas City. So, it's noteworthy. So keep that in mind with Juszczyk when we're building lineups. All right, so let's go ahead and go back to the DraftKings. Let's start to build a lineup here. I think the guys that I like most at captain are going to be Kelce and Samuel. I think that McCaffrey is a little too expensive to put in at captain. So I'm going to go with one of those other guys because, all the good players are high priced in this one. It's going to be tough to build a lineup. So let's get into this. Before I start building, just a reminder, hit that like button. Give me to 20 likes so I can put out a shorter video when we get closer to the Super Bowl. And make sure to subscribe to the YouTube page. Looking for 500 subscribers. I'm at 470 right now, so just need 30 left. Actually, at 469, so I need 31. So if you guys would be nice and hit that subscribe, that would be great. Let's go to this matchup, and let's plug in Deebo as the captain. I think Deebo might be my favorite captain in this. I like Kelce too. I'm gonna go with Purdy over Mahomes, and that's a tough one. Actually, you know what? I'll tell you what, let's get McCaffrey in there before I start putting any quarterbacks in there. Let's go with Juszczyk because I can see right off the bat I'm going to need some salary relief. And Juszczyk is my favorite cheap guy. I think for $800, if he gets us 6 DraftKings points, that'll be good. So I'm looking at 6,600 left per guy. So, it's an interesting situation. Both of these quarterbacks are capable of putting up games that are, well above 20 DraftKings points or well below 20 DraftKings points. So, based on the way that I'm building here, I'm going run heavy with McCaffrey and Juszczyk. I got Deebo in the captain. It might be a better build with McCaffrey and Juszczyk to put Kelce in the captain. And let's go with Samuel. Let's keep Samuel in there. Leaves me with about 12.7 per guy. If I wanted to put Mahomes in there, for the sake of argument, that leaves me with 2,100. Leaves me with guys like Hardman, Tony. We've seen from those box scores that they don't shy away from necessarily using some of these weird guys, some of these dumpster dive type of plays. Noah Gray would be interesting in that situation. Sky Moore if he's off injured reserve, or we could do something like take Mahomes out. We could put Purdy in there. That gives us 2,700. That puts us up to Justin Watson. So ideally, like this lineup would be perfect for Mahomes to be, fit into it as opposed to Watson. But if we want to do that, let's mess around a little bit here. Let's put Mahomes back in there. Let's drop down from Samuel to Kittle. And let's take Watson out there. That leaves us with 4,900. That puts us in a situation where we could use the 49ers D. We could put Juwan Jennings in there. We could put the Chiefs D in there. We have a lot of options with this direction, which is what I like. We got Mahomes to Kelce. And then we got Juszczyk, McCaffrey, and Kittle. So we got the running game covered. We got Kittle maybe taking advantage of the, like the vulnerability of Kansas City in that, like in the middle of the field. Let's see. I want to check the injury report real quick for these guys. I want to see. I know there's a guy on the Chiefs. We just lost. I think it was offensive lineman. Joe Tooney is not practicing today. Charles Omenihu is out with a torn ACL. He tore his ACL. Let's see. 49ers injuries. Yeah, 49ers injuries are only guys that are on injured reserve. So that was the only guys on their injury report. So it looks like McCaffrey is not having any negative effects from that landing on his head. Danny Gray, Ross Dwelly, Nick Zakelj, Kalia Davis, Drake Jackson, Clellan Farrell, Talanahu Hufanga. Those guys are all out on injured reserve right now. For Kansas City, on the injury report is Kadarius Toney, Joe Tooney, Willie Gay Jr., and Charles Omenihu. So that's pretty significant for the defense of Kansas City with Willie Gay and let's see here. Hang on a sec here. Going to check out one more thing with the injury report to see how questionable some of these guys are. Let's see. Yeah, so Charles, the Omenihu and Gay, obviously. Let's see. I'm gonna see how questionable some of these guys are. Well, I don't have a great injury report right now, so we'll look at that later. But all we got to know right now is that the defense is super banged up, especially losing Omenihu. So just keep that in mind when you're building, like as if like San Francisco, had some advantages already against that defense in that Brock Purdy does well against pressure, against the blitz, and against man coverage. And, it gets even better when you see the injuries to the Kansas City defense. That's even better for Brock Purdy. So maybe we swap this out. Let's get Purdy. Let's get Samuel in there as the captain. And let's get Purdy in there. I want to get up to Kelce again, so I need to get 3K here. So I'm going to go away from Kittle. I'm going to get Kelce in there. Let's leave with 3,200. Not as good a spot, but, we do have options like Valdez-Scantling. We got Justin Watson. So it gives us, puts us in a spot actually for one of those wideouts that I think is in the better matchup. So we definitely have like some pretty good options there as far as that final spot. Like normally I would hate seeing Valdez-Scantling and Justin Watson as my only options, but knowing what the matchup is on the Kansas City side, knowing that we have, like the weakness against San Francisco is going to be that wide out position. I mean, that's a pretty good spot to land in. We don't have any defenses or anything like that we can go with, but we do have like those wide out options, which is good. If we wanted to go in a different direction, I know a lot of people are going to want to use Christian McCaffrey in the captain. Let's see how much it restricts us. Kelce's my guy on the Chiefs this week. And maybe we get Pacheco in there too. This might be a build where we lean away from quarterbacks. Let's go with Butker in this one, because I think Butker, these guys are driving, but they're getting stalled out in the end zone. It's a lower scoring game. Christian McCaffrey, the raw points leader, maybe he's significantly outscoring everybody else on the slate. So this one, we have a good base there. If we want to go down to Juszczyk again and get him in there, that's going to leave us with 8K. At that point, we have Rashee Rice as an option. I don't like it. I like Kittle a lot better than Rashee Rice, and Kittle would be an option for us. We would have, if we want to put Kittle in there and see if there was something to mess around a little bit with, maybe Butker comes out. Yeah, no, Butker is probably the best option in that range. Juszczyk, if we take him out, I mean, we have Justin Watson at that point. So we got a 4-2 build on the side of San Francisco. I mean, on the side of Kansas City, but we got a captain in Christian McCaffrey. And, Christian McCaffrey could take this game over. And Kittle could be the only other guy that benefits. And then on the Kansas City side, like you got Pacheco, Kelce, and Butker scoring the most points. This is a low-scoring game here. So, like Justin Watson makes sense, because if it's a low-scoring game, then Justin Watson could sneak in here with, like 6 DraftKings points or something like we were talking about with Juszczyk. You could put a Juszczyk in this build if you wanted to. You got Hardman. We got Gray. So we have some options there. Like that'd probably be, more of a chalkier way to go. If we wanted to put, we can't really get Mahomes in this build unless we get rid of Kelce. So it's going to be tough to get quarterbacks in the build if you go with McCaffrey, unless you think that one of those quarterbacks can outscore Kelce. I would tend to lean on the side of Kelce over the quarterbacks in this matchup, especially if I got McCaffrey in the captain. So, that's a direction that I think we can go. And I don't think that there's going to be many people fading both quarterbacks in the Super Bowl. So, when we get into next week, I'll build some more lineups and, figure out some different paths we can go in with my guests. But let's go with Pacheco one more. We'll go with Pacheco in the captain. Let's go with McCaffrey. Let's go with Kelce. And let's try to go with Purdy, because we got Pacheco in the captain. Let's go with Juszczyk. That's going to leave us with 5K. So we have an option to put like Butker, 49ers D, Jennings, Chiefs D. We got a lot of options there, which I like. I don't like not having a guy like Deebo in there, though. So ultimately, my favorite builds are those ones that I did in the beginning, where we got Deebo in the captain. Let's see. We go with Purdy there. We go with Juszczyk. And, maybe 3,200. That's where we had Watson or Valdez-Scantling. I mean, that's probably my favorite option out of the ones I built today. So we'll see how that changes over the next few days. But I just wanted to give you guys a good look at what the slate is looking like for the Chiefs versus the 49ers. Make sure, as I mentioned, to hit that like button, looking for 20 likes to put out a shorter video as we get closer to the Super Bowl. And make sure to subscribe to the channel. I'm at 469 right now, looking for 500. So help me get there. I appreciate that. And sign up for an Underdog account using promo code SEEK. Be doing an Underdog show at some point next week too. They will match you up to $100 on your first deposit for new accounts. And you got to get that free money when you can. So get that free money. And I will see you guys when I do the next Super Bowl show. Thanks, guys.